Hello and welcome to our ongoing coverage of the US presidential inauguration. I'm Ellen Fanning.
And I'm Stan Grant. Joe Biden is the 46th President of the United States of America, but he inherits a country on its knees, a nation he's described as locked in an uncivil war. He says his mission is to heal a broken land.
And Stan, what we've witnessed today is a ceremony for a divided country. It seemed every speaker at the inauguration referred to the insurrection at the Capitol. The mood was a touch melancholy as Joe Biden and Kamala Harris took the oath of office, and there was almost a sense of weary relief after the partisanship of the Trump years. Donald Trump was not there, but his legacy was unavoidable. Let's take a look.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President-elect of the United States, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. and Dr. Jill Biden.
Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. do solemnly swear.
I, Kamala Daisy Harris, do solemnly swear.
Preserve, protect, and defend
the Constitution of the United States.
the Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
Highlights from the inauguration of Joe Biden in Washington, D.C. today. John Barron from Planet America joins us now. John, a very different ceremony we saw today, and very much a sense, I thought, of Joe Biden having bringing the Americans into the study and giving them a grandfatherly talk about this moment, this need for unity.
It was a very sombre, low-key inaugural address after a swearing-in that had some of the familiarity, I suppose, of past inaugurations. It reminded me somewhat, Ellen, of a wedding conducted by a hospital bedside. Familiar service amongst a sense of tragedy and fear and loss. The most eloquent moment in Joe Biden's 21-minute address for me was the moment of silent prayer he called upon for the 400,000 Americans who've perished in this pandemic, in part because of the mishandling of it by his predecessor, as 191,000 flags flapped quietly in an empty National Mall. It couldn't have been more poignant than that.
John, listening to the speech, he invoked Lincoln a lot. They love to invoke Lincoln, don't they? He even quoted a lot from Lincoln. And it put me in mind of Lincoln's second inaugural, where in the midst of a civil war, he's saying, let's finish this work we are in. Let's bind up our wounds. it really goes to this eternal tension, doesn't it, between the better angels of our nature and the dark realities of America. Where does he sit now? How does he achieve this unity when the fact of the matter is there are red states and blue states, there is a black America and a white America, and there are deep, deep divisions?
I couldn't agree more, Stan. This is a president taking his oath of office at a time of greater disunity and civil unrest, really, since 1865. And bear in mind, of course, within a month of that second inaugural, Lincoln himself was dead, one of the final fatalities of that war, which claimed 600,000 American lives. We're at a similar moment of peril now. This inauguration taking place 2 weeks to the day after an insurrection on the very steps on the western side of the Capitol building where the platform for the inaugural ceremony was erected. An extraordinary tableau that we saw. And you're right, presidents always talk of unity, of coming together at this moment, but usually they're just talking about there's been an election where half the country maybe voted for the other guy. This time, America has faced a deep, deep peril and a president who for 2 months has denied the democratic outcome. And democracy and unity was certainly the central theme of all the speakers, but Biden himself. Take a look at this piece.
We've learned again that democracy is precious. Democracy is fragile. And at this hour, my friends, democracy has prevailed. So now, on this hallowed ground where just a few days ago, violence sought to shake the Capitol's very foundation, we come together as one nation, under God, indivisible, to carry out the peaceful transfer of power as we have for more than 2 centuries.
So, democracy has prevailed, unspoken but understood. It is despite the best efforts of the now ex-president Donald Trump. But the central question here, of course, is what does unity look like? Americans aren't going to suddenly agree on the role of government, how much tax they should pay and who should get government-subsidised healthcare. But can they agree on fundamental issues such as American democracy itself? That is the test of this time.
We should probably talk about Biden's agenda and what he can achieve, but let's just reflect just one more moment on the inaugural speech, because as I was watching at 3 o'clock this morning, I very much wanted you beside me to ask you this question. You are a student of US politics. I wonder, do you think that the rhetoric that this president used is a departure from sort of traditional American speech-making and leadership rhetoric? He talked about the rise of political extremism. He talked about white supremacy, domestic terrorism.
Uncivil war.
Uncivil war, yeah, a broken land. He could have stood up and said, we are a resilient republic, we will endure.
Oh, there was that. There was that, but it was tempered by the other message, wasn't it?
And I was very struck by the fact that he kind of held up that mirror to the nation and said, you must look. It's not only I can solve this, as Trump had said, but only we can solve this together.
It's interesting in terms of rhetorical style. Of course, Joe Biden, who came of age during the Kennedy administration and has just become only the second Catholic president after John F. Kennedy. And there were Kennedy-esque flourishes. America must lead by the example of its strength rather than the strength of its example. But ultimately, this was more of a Franklin Roosevelt fireside chat, who in the dark days of the Great Depression, as fascism rose around the world, said we have nothing to fear but fear itself, but also told some hard truths by the fireside and said, this is what we have to do to get through it. It's not going to be fast, it's not going to be easy. But he's advocating for a role that government will play in all of that, and that is where Joe Biden is potentially going to be the most FDR-like president we've seen possibly since Lyndon Johnson in the 1960s, to say that the way out of this hole that has been dug by this pandemic and this economic collapse is in part through the role that government can play in lifting people up and taking care of the weak and the elderly, because, of course, with 400,000 dead, there are 25 million who've suffered from COVID. Many millions of those could have a lifetime of illness. We just don't know, but we do know the lingering effects will be a significant policy challenge for this administration.
Thank you, John. Interesting, John was talking there, of course, about COVID, and that's front and centre, isn't it? You know, that's the challenge right now and the crisis he has to deal with, and that's what impacted today as well. No people. No one there.
But also, these inaugural ceremonies began last night, American time, with really the first occasion for national mourning, where they went into the Capitol and stood there, the President-elect and his wife, the Vice President-elect and her husband, and stood to have that national moment of mourning. And it's significant, with 400,000 people dead in America, that was the first time that had happened.
More than died in World War II, as they pointed out today as well. Let's go to Greg Jennett now, who's on the National Mall in Washington. And really, Greg, that was it, wasn't it? This was the ceremony for the COVID era. No one, no crowd in attendance, a sombre mood, and that enormous challenge facing Joe Biden.
No doubt about it, that at all, Stan, and I can attest to that because of where we are. We are in a privileged position on the National Mall, along with other privileged people who are, in essence, the media, security credentialed and checked, the National Guard, police, and no one else. That's the nature of this very unique inauguration. There are flags out here on the lawn to my right, but that's all. They are representative only of the American people who cannot be here this evening and could not have been here at high noon when Joe Biden began his presidency. This, of course, was already baked in because of the pandemic, but the trashing of the Capitol earlier this month redoubled the security effort and made sure that people were not only absent from the mall itself, but from greater Washington, D.C. The ABC's had reporters roving around the city today, hoping that there might be some spontaneous outbreaks of celebration and, who knows, maybe even First Amendment right protests. But lo and behold, that did not happen. Nothing has been spied along those lines and along the streets of this capital city at any point through today. This is a virtual only and a made-for-media event.
And Greg, there were 3 former presidents at the ceremony today, all of them younger than Joe Biden. There were 2 absences. One was Jimmy Carter, who one commentator described as not physically strong enough to be there. And the other, of course, was Donald Trump, who CNN, which has had a fractious relationship with the former president, said was emotionally not strong enough to be there. So take us to Donald Trump. No longer the US president, how will his administration be remembered?
For all of his loquaciousness and trademark razzmatazz and showbiz, Ellen, it was a subdued and rather silent Donald Trump who left Washington, D.C. in a very perfunctory manner today. Almost no remarks on the way to Marine One at the White House, and then just thanking the obvious people who needed to be thanked from his administration when he landed out at Joint Base Andrews. There was a reference to seeing you all again soon, whatever that means, but it was by Donald Trump's own choice to absent himself from the inauguration ceremony, and having decided to do that, I guess it naturally follows that however he staged his departure, it was going to be small and unremarkable compared to the main event on Capitol Hill. And so it was. But as he left, the shadow of impeachment, of course, follows him all the way down to Florida. The Senate is going through confirmation processes already, but will have to turn its mind to some trial on those impeachment charges before too long. We don't know exactly when that might be. But the final remarks of Donald Trump, we can bring that to our audience now. It is somewhat unremarkable, and here they are, his final words.
We've gotten so much done that nobody thought would be possible, but I do want to thank Congress, and I want to thank all of the great people of Washington, D.C., all of the people that we worked with to put this miracle together. So, have a good life. We will see you soon.
Yeah, Greg, of course, this is not just a ceremonial day, it's a work day. Day one of the Biden presidency, and the first 100 days we know are absolutely critical. He's down to business and some executive orders signed already.
He's down to business. He's in the Oval Office. The interior redecorations, or at least some of them, Stan, have been carried out already. And there are no fewer than, let's say, a dozen. It could be about 15 to 17 executive orders have been flagged for signing, and they reflect the priorities of the Biden agenda. They were spelt out in great detail in his crafted speech. So they go to the pandemic, compulsory mask wearing on federal premises, offices and buildings, suspending or stripping away most of the so-called Muslim travel ban from the Trump era, and also halting any further work on the Mexican border wall. So although Joe Biden talks a lot and I'm sure will deliver on themes of bipartisanship, there was also an urgent priority to try to trash some of the Donald Trump legacy from day one. But the Biden speech, as I say, was cleverly crafted, and you didn't have to listen too closely to every word to get the fact that this president, the 46th, is taking seriously the tackling of the pandemic and the reunification of the American people as his most urgent priority.
Few people in our nation's history have been more challenged or found a time more challenging or difficult than the time we're in now. Once-in-a-century virus that silently stalks the country. It's taken as many lives in 1 year as America lost in all of World War II. Millions of jobs have been lost. Hundreds of thousands of businesses closed. A cry for racial justice, some 400 years in the making, moves us. The dream of justice for all will be deferred no longer. A cry for survival comes from the planet itself, a cry that can't be any more desperate or any more clear. And now, a rise of political extremism, white supremacy, domestic terrorism that we must confront and we will defeat.
There's a serious body of work ahead for Joe Biden as president, but still enough time left in the day for some celebration too. The parade across America, a virtual celebration of the national talents, is about to get underway, and most of America, if not the world, will be watching.
Greg Jenner, thank you so very much. What an extraordinary day to be standing. There you are in the Capitol. I mean, 4 years ago you would have been surrounded by people. They would have been leaping into the back of the camera and making peace signs and all the rest of it. But there you are, a solo figure there in Washington tonight. Thanks so much for being with us.
Extraordinary, is it, when you think that the outgoing president was not there and that there was no mention of him by name by Joe Biden either. That's like, let's just wipe the slate clean. I wonder about that. I wonder if that doesn't sort of, if there's not a smallness in that, both the smallness from obviously Donald Trump not attending, but also to say, look, acknowledge the presidency while repudiating the legacy, because there are 70+ million people out there who voted for Donald Trump. If you're looking at unity, you can't just wish it away, can you?
Nevertheless, that entire speech was about Trumpism, if not about
Trumpism,
Trump.
and a repudiation, yeah.
It is an historic day with the first woman, the first black and the first South Asian American to be appointed as the Vice President of the United States. Here is the moment Kamala Harris was sworn in by Justice Sonia Sotomayor.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Kamala Davy Harris, do solemnly swear
I, Kamala Davy Harris, do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
against all enemies.
Across to Joe Biden in the Oval Office.
Economy as well. And these are just all starting points. We're going to, in the process of rebuilding the economy, do what I said throughout the campaign and while running, to rebuild the backbone of the country, the middle class. And so there's going to be a lot of focus on that. And I think some of the things we're going to be doing are going to be bold and vital. And there's no time to start like today. So what I'm going to be doing, I'm proud with today's executive actions. I'm going to start by keeping the promises I made to the American people. A long way to go. These are just executive actions. They are important, but we're going to need legislation for a lot of the things we're going to do. And the first order I'm going to be signing here relates to COVID, and it's requiring, as I said all along, where I have authority, mandating masks be worn, social distancing be kept on federal property, on interstate commerce, etc. So this is the first one I'm signing. And the second one I'm signing here is the support for underserved communities, and we're going to make sure we have some bedrock equity, equality as it relates to how we treat people and health care and other things. We'll give you copies of these executive orders. And the third one I'm going to sign, and that's what I'm going to do while you're all here, is the commitment I made that we're going to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord as of today.
Mr. President. Thank you. Mr. President.
First one there, Ellen. First executive order, of course, is about masks, is about COVID, equity, healthcare, and Paris. Interestingly, you know, it was. I think the Paris pulling out of Paris was meant to fall due, was to be ratified the day after.
That's right.
So he's now halted that, and that's a really significant sign, because one of the things that Joe Biden has talked about is rebuilding alliances. It's not America alone. It's not America first. It is America leading a world of alliances, and that's an important part of that rebuilding of those alliances.
Well, Maya King is the Campaign 2020 Reporting Fellow at Politico, and she joins us now from Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for being with us, Maya. You've been with us throughout our coverage of this US election season. So take me to your first impressions of the inauguration.
Well, it's certainly been a day here in Washington, D.C. I think, honestly, one of the biggest differences this year is, of course, the fact that most of the press and a majority, in fact, of the American people are not able to be there in person, both due to the coronavirus and the security risks. So driving around downtown Washington is almost impossible. There is a very large military and law enforcement presence. And all day today, that's really been something that's front of mind for a number of people, looking out at really what's not much of a crowd beyond the dignitaries that were present at the inauguration today. But other than that, it certainly was a very different tone as it relates to American politics and American political events. This morning, we saw former President, now Donald Trump, say goodbye to the nation, and just a few hours later then welcomed in a new and considerably more diverse presidential administration and cabinet.
Maya, one of the highlights today was a recitation of a poem by America's youth poet laureate. I want to ask you about that, but let's have a listen.
We lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first. We must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true. That even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried, that we'll forever be tied together, victorious, not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division.
Maya Gorman, Amanda Gorman there, Maya. And The Hill We Climb is the poem that she was reciting there. I'm really interested in this, Maya. I'd like to get your take on this. That is clearly a message of hope and healing, a message of a new beginning, of coming together, putting down our arms. And yet we see America really tearing itself apart. And I'm wondering if you are the poor left behind, or if you are black Americans who have seen people killed on the streets, and we've seen the surge of protest around the Black Lives Matter movement. Does that message of hope, however uplifting, does that really still resonate?
Well, you know, it's an interesting question. I believe that it resonates to an extent, but what I'm hearing from sources, from those that I've spoken to, and just in my coverage now over the last 4 to 5 months particularly, is that representation is extremely important. Messaging is important. These are things that feel good, that you know, signal some kind of a different future than what we've seen from the Trump administration. But more than anything else, what communities of color, what Black communities are really looking for now from this administration that they haven't seen before is policy, and policy that actually recognizes the divisions that exist and the systemic inequities that exist as they relate to communities of color and their relationships to white communities and their relationships really to the rest of the country. I think that Miss Gorman's poem was absolutely fantastic and really captured the essence of what America, what we would like to see it be and the future that we would like to see. And I think that was absolutely her goal here. And so now watching it, and again, having that be informed just by my own experiences and the reporting that I've done, it's really more now on the big question, which is, you know, how can you deliver on this, and how can you make this country the country that is really espoused in Miss Gorman's poetry and the country that they've been asking for through their vote.
And Maya, talk to me about the moment where Vice President Kamala Harris was sworn in, the first woman, the first black woman, the first woman of South Asian descent to be sworn in. What did that look like through American eyes?
It was really a significant moment. A number of people, when talking about this, have compared it to seeing Barack Obama in 2009 inaugurated as president, then of course first black president. And with Harris, it's certainly that same feeling. And it's also, I think, a very significant recognition of the role that women of color in the United States played in electing Democrats and in electing this ticket. They were at the forefront of a number of the protests this summer against systemic racism and police violence. And they also were very much key players in getting out the vote and mobilizing voters, and across ethnic groups turned out in the largest numbers. So this is certainly a very historic moment, and one that is not lost on anyone here, and also very much a solidification, I think, of the political power that women of color have played in this country.
Maya, thank you. It's been fantastic having you on. We had you on during the debates, and of course the election coverage. So thank you so much for being part of this. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, remarkable, isn't it? You know, and you see that tension between hope and reality, the better angels of our nature and the darker aspects of America, and then you see Obama, and then as you've heard the reference to Obama's inauguration there, and then you see Kamala Harris, and that's America. Dangles out that little bit of hope and promise, while also, you know, the harsh reality of it.
There was a line in The Hill We Climb, that poem we were referring to. Being American is not the pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. And so I found that interesting, that idea, you know, Biden said it himself, a cry for racial justice 400 years in the making will no longer be deferred, a cry for survival for the planet itself. It's interesting, there's not a notion that we began perfect and something has happened on the me. There's a real hard look at original sin here, and I wonder whether that isn't an interesting moment for America.
Well, it's always about building a more perfect union, not a perfect union. It's an experiment, America. It's an idea, isn't it? Well, Joe Biden has certainly set out a sweeping mission statement for his presidency at a time when the US is facing some powerful headwinds at home and overseas. Jeremy Fernandez lays out some of the main items on the agenda for this new administration.
Joe Biden's own words.
I sought this office to restore the soul of America, to rebuild the backbone of this nation, the middle class, and to make America respected around the world again.
By any standard, that's a tall order. Here's how he plans to deliver it. First, healthcare. The coronavirus pandemic has shown just how flawed the American healthcare system is. Some 11 million people have lost insurance coverage through their employers because of the pandemic. And that means there won't be any major reforms such as Medicare for All.
I'm not naive about the fact that health care is an issue that has divided Americans in the past.
The next best option is to try for a public insurance option as an alternative to private health insurance. He's also promised to make healthcare more accessible for younger people and more affordable. Even this idea is likely to rankle Republicans, the powerful healthcare lobby, and even some Democrats who don't like the idea of government intervention in public health.
Policy changes that we're going to be making are going to take time.
Number 2, it's the economy.
A two-step plan of rescue and recovery.
One thing Joe Biden has consistently advocated for is taxes on the rich.
We don't need a tax code that rewards wealth more than it rewards work.
He may also roll back tax cuts that were brought in by Donald Trump.
He wants to terminate the tax cuts that we gave him.
And revisit pulling up the corporate tax rate. But there are Republicans and Democrats who are lukewarm on effective tax increases because of their potential to damage business and consumer confidence, therefore the economic recovery.
We have to act, and we have to act now.
This brings us to American trade and foreign policy. The Biden campaign has firmly put domestic affairs on its immediate agenda, so don't expect any movement on the trade war with China just yet.
We're going after China in the wrong way.
Nevertheless, Joe Biden is under pressure to remove at least some of the tariffs that Donald Trump imposed on overseas goods.
To make it real clear to China, there are international rules that if you want to play by, we'll play with you.
The new president wants to re-engage with America's allies to face up to China's increasing global influence.
I'm letting them know that America's back. We're going to be back in the game.
Joe Biden has been ambitious on the environment too. He's widely expected to rejoin the Paris Climate Pact.
Back into the business of leading the world.
On the way to trying to make America a zero-emissions economy by 2050.
We're going to make historic investments that will seize the opportunity and meet this moment in history.
He'll also try to rescind Donald Trump's orders speeding up fossil fuel projects.
We're going to lock in progress that no future president can roll back or undercut.
We can also expect a push for stricter fuel economy in new vehicles and a greater role for the Pentagon in climate policy. Then there's immigration and the border wall. Joe Biden has long said construction would stop under his watch.
There will not be another foot of wall constructed on my administration.
But he's now spruiking immigration reform, including high-tech border management, providing pathways to citizenship for some undocumented migrants, and permanently bringing back DACA, deferred action for childhood arrivals.
Together, we can restore our values as a nation of immigrants and as a nation that values immigrants.
But for every dream, there's a wake-up call. The Democrats only hold slender majorities in both houses of Congress, while Joe Biden has the same powers to issue executive orders that his predecessors had. A majority in Congress guarantees only so much. Regulatory change can also often get bogged down in disputes with powerful lobbies that send these challenges to the courts, which are weighted with conservative judges appointed by Donald Trump. So that vision of hope and change will, for now, be tempered by modest expectations and incremental reforms.
You know, one of the things we should acknowledge here, Ellen, too, is just what a remarkable personal achievement this is for Joe Biden. He tried to, he sought the presidency twice before and it failed. But just the incredible personal human tragedy he's had to endure. He lost his wife and his first wife and his daughter in a car crash. Of course, he lost his son later, tragically as well. It's been an incredible personal journey.
And I was interested to read the writer Fintan O'Toole said that perhaps what Joe Biden brings to this moment, more significantly than all those years of legislative experience, is not so much his political character, but his personal character as somebody who's overcome tragedy and someone that Fintan O'Toole describes as the most melancholy president perhaps the country's had since Lincoln.
Yeah.
Well, Christine Todd Whitman is the former Governor of New Jersey and the former Administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency in the US, and she joins us now from Arizona. Thank you so much for being with us.
Good to be with you.
You have been on the record for years and years and years now saying that Donald Trump does not have the character or conviction, or did not have the character and conviction to be president. And that's put you at odds with other members of your Republican Party. You are a storied Republican yourself. And I wonder, what do you think are the prospects of those Republicans who just days ago voted in overwhelming numbers in Congress not to ratify the election of Joe Biden, that they will suddenly heed today's call for unity?
Well, I think many of them are going to pay a price for that. And it's going to be up to those of us who think that they were trying to undercut the Constitution and the legitimacy of the vote to remind people of that. But that's exactly what they did. And that is traitorous in many ways. So they'll be there. They'll still be. The party is, there really is no Republican Party at the moment. It's the Trump Party. But as it sorts itself out, it's clear from what the Senate leader, Mitch McConnell, has been saying, that he is trying desperately to separate the brand Republican from Donald Trump in order to make the party relevant again so that he can regain the Senate, which is what he wants to do, and be leader for one last time, one would hope. But it's going to be a struggle. There's no question about it. Just as the challenges that Joe Biden faces are huge, this is a big one as well.
And you're talking about a reckoning for the Republican Party. None of this, let's quickly move on to healing without accountability and reckoning. You're talking about, as a lot of people do in the Republican Party, the need to dump Trump to remake the party. Is impeachment, a conviction on that impeachment charge of inciting an insurrection, necessary to achieve that? Will those, I think, 17 Republican senators have to vote to impeach Trump to rid the Republican Party of his legacy and Trumpism?
Well, I think that's going to depend. The House and the Senate, when they convene, or the Senate particularly when they convene the trial, has got to be very careful about collecting evidence, hard evidence, to convince the people that this isn't just a witch hunt. I mean, frankly, you have to be held accountable for your actions. And his actions on the 6th of January and leading up to it were unconscionable. And he should be held accountable for that. There are a lot of other things, but those are what the charges are about, what happened on the 6th of January and his culpability in that, and he has culpability. But it's going to be up to those who hold the trial to make sure that they really have hard evidence that they can show to the people, even though there'll be those who will never accept it, that this is true. Because the one thing that Republicans who are not Trump supporters or who want to see the party built back would like to know is that Donald Trump could never run for president again. That's a separate action. The Senate would have to vote to impeach, to agree with that, and then they vote. There's a second vote that comes that says he can no longer hold office. And I think that one should be, if he's convicted in the Senate as well as the House, then I think the second vote in the Senate is going to be an easy one, because who wants a twice impeached president? I mean, he's been impeached twice, but a twice impeached, once convicted president.
Christine, can I ask you about the environment? We just saw Joe Biden sign one of those executive orders, and it was to re-enter the Paris Climate Accords. We know that he said that the United States is committed to getting US to net zero emissions by 2050. What does this mean for the leadership that America will take, and what does it mean for allies? I'm thinking about Australia here, for example, where our Prime Minister is saying that we will get to net zero as soon as possible, sometime in the second half of the century. What can we see on the environment front?
Well, he's clearly made climate change a central issue. He recognizes the importance of climate change, what it's doing to our world and our country, and what it's doing to our economy in this country. And frankly, there's a relationship between climate change and pandemics, because as you change ecosystems, you change pathogens, and things come into contact with one another that hadn't before. So it's all part of an overall effort by this president to get us back on our feet again. It's going to be tough, but by taking that first step of Paris, rejoining the Paris Accord, is sending the message that this is a change, this is a new administration, we're serious. But I believe that in order to get our allies across the world to truly accept that America is back and firmly back, it's going to take some real action here in the United States. And whether that's pushing through higher gas mileage, whether it is taking more steps to put a cap on carbon somehow, whether a carbon tax or cap and trade, however they choose to do it, It's going to take some steps like that to get the rest of the world behind us. But this is a global issue, like the global pandemic, COVID-19. This is a global issue. We all suffer from what other countries do. And I think right now, it's kind of incredible to see the science and still be able to deny it.
Christine Todd Whitman, I've watched your political career with such interest over so many years. It's such a pleasure to have spoken to you today.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you, and to all my friends in Australia, I wish you all well as you deal with all the challenges that you face as well.
Thank you again. Well, the country Joe Biden now leads is recording around 250,000 new coronavirus infections and more than 3,000 virus deaths every day. Those numbers are worse than they've ever been, and they continue to worsen. Casey Briggs takes a look at how the US got to where it is and how President Biden's plan differs from the approach of his predecessor.
Joe Biden walks into the White House almost exactly a year after the pandemic first came to America.
A Washington state resident fell ill after returning from Wuhan, China.
The new president has put the crisis at the top of his prescription for the country. The current figures are eye-watering. How did they get so high? The seeds of the crisis were sown way back at the beginning of the outbreak. The former president downplayed the early cases.
It's going to disappear. One day, it's like a miracle, it will disappear.
Meanwhile, the virus was seeping into the community, in many cases undetected. Testing was bottlenecked, and it took 6 weeks before local hospitals and labs were able to conduct them. Plenty of time for outbreaks to be seeded across the nation. Hotspots in New York, quickly followed by waves in the southern USA, with a patchwork of state responses and an undisciplined population.
If I get corona, I get corona. At the end of the day, I'm not going to let it stop me from partying.
Complicating the response, the pandemic had rapidly become an issue viewed on partisan lines. A global poll by Pew in the middle of last year found 76% of Republican supporters felt the US was handling the pandemic well. Just 29% of those who didn't identify with the governing party thought the same. That's a 47-point gap on party lines. The equivalent partisan gap in Australia, 5 percentage points.
And then I see the disinfectant, where it knocks it out in a minute.
Joe Biden's made much of putting experts front and centre. His predecessor had an at times strained relationship with top infectious disease official Anthony Fauci. Donald Trump's been fired, but Joe Biden is keeping Dr. Fauci on his team.
Like every good doctor, he'll tell me what I need to know, not what I want to know.
But how do you flatten the curve from here, given there's less of an appetite for hard lockdowns, even among some of the governors that were quickest to impose them last year?
We simply cannot stay closed until the vaccine hits critical mass. The cost is too high. We will have nothing left to open.
Joe Biden has pledged to massively ramp up testing facilities, which are still seeing long queues, and resolve supply issues with protective equipment. The new president also wants all Americans to wear masks for 100 days, and he wants state governors to make wearing them mandatory.
For God's sake, wear a mask, if not for yourself, for your loved ones, for your country.
The light at the end of the tunnel is mass vaccination. Vaccines have been developed and approved remarkably fast, but providing jabs hasn't been as speedy.
The vaccine rollout in the United States has been a dismal failure thus far.
As of mid-January, states had used only around a third of the doses they'd been shipped, and some doses have even gone to waste, expired before they could be used.
Number one priority, getting vaccine in people's arms.
More mass vaccination sites like this one at Disneyland have been opening. But Joe Biden says it can go faster. He wants 100 million doses administered within his first 100 days.
This is not a political issue. This is about saving lives.
And then there's the economic fallout of the pandemic. From March to April, employment plunged faster than has ever been seen before. 22 million people lost their jobs in the space of a month. And while it's started to recover, nearly 9 million fewer Americans have a job now than at the start of 2020. Joe Biden wants $400 billion for a response package, and he may find that easier to get once his party takes control of the US Senate. But as we've seen time and time again in America, uniting is often something that's far easier said than done.
Well, Dr. Norman Swan is the host of the CoronaCast podcast and RN's Health Report, and he joins us now. Very first executive order was about COVID, was about masks. That's what he has to deal with immediately. It's tough though, isn't it? You know, we heard there, you're trying to deal with something in healthcare that the states have a lot of responsibility for. Can he deliver?
Well, it's even more fundamental than that. If you go back to the 1918-19 pandemic, America did really badly in that as well compared to other countries. It goes to the culture of the United States. I mean, we sit here and we can't understand why they don't have healthcare. We can't understand guns. But what you really just need to understand is the individualistic culture. It's what does make America great in many ways because of the ability to build huge businesses and do things and get things done. But there's not that necessarily community spirit that we have here in Australia.
And that's why the mask became a cultural touchstone, didn't it? It became a political statement. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you're not going to tell me what to do. This is the land of the free. And that stops a lot of culture. In fact, Cuomo was asked in an interview, declare an interest, as my son doing a television interview with Andrew Cuomo, he asks, what does it take to be a leader in American politics? And Cuomo, it was a very salient answer. He said, basically, you can't be a leader. You've got to be a follower and follow American opinion. So it's really hard to get out there and do that. So that's the fundamental thing. You've got a fragmented healthcare system. You don't have a healthcare system in the United States. So you've got to build stuff that's not necessarily there. There's no network of general practitioners in primary care. So the task is so much bigger than we've got here, even proportionate to the population. So it's really tough.
And so he talks about using federal dollars to get out, using whatever resources the federal government can muster to set up community centres to actually organise that sort of basic infrastructure that you're talking about, almost a military-style operation to roll it out. Now,
he's got to bypass the states, right? In a sense, in essence, the states that don't want to play. Which is how Obamacare works. You know, if Obamacare works, so if you've got a state that doesn't want to play, you've got a backup in terms of Medicare. So that's what he's doing.
And do you think that's likely? 100 days, 100 million vaccines. If he can get out and get that done, I mean, this is critical. This is the beginning of everything, right? Economic recovery, American leadership, everything starts with that vaccination rollout.
Well, in theory, it's possible, but it's a standing start. Yeah. I think Casey mentioned it, but I think the statistic, last time I looked, which was a few days ago, could be out of date. They distributed 30 million doses and only 12 million were actually given. So they're getting to the end of a day, for example. Now in Israel, they get to the end of the day, they've got doses left over. They get on it, they text. They've got a list of people to text to come in, say, do you want your vaccine? So 20-year-olds might come in who are not on the priority list to get the vaccine so they don't waste a dose. I think it's happening in the UK as well. So doses have been wasted, mixing up regulation, not sure who they're going to give it to. And once you've opened the Pfizer box, you've got to use them because it's got to be kept at -70. So enormous logistical things. I don't think he's not going to do it. It's an aspiration, but it'd be great if he could. I mean, that'd be 1 in 3 of the population. I mean, he's got to get there. And you're only going to see reduced transmission when you've covered the elderly and the frail, but the transmission occurs in younger age groups. So when you get beyond that and you immunise the younger age groups, that's when you're going to see reduced transmission. You'll see reduced deaths and hospitalisations with that first 100 million doses, but reduced transmission has to be in younger people.
Yeah. And you're right, Alan, it goes to this question of American leadership, and Joe Biden has talked about that today. It's not just about a new dawn for America, but restoring America's place in the world. Dr. Michael Fullilove is the Executive Director of the Lowy Institute. That's an independent think tank which researches international politics from an Australian perspective, and he joins us now. Just going to that question, Michael, it's good to have you here, and, you know, obviously you're a long-time student of American politics, but just going to that question of American leadership and what is required here. We heard our previous guest talk about re-establishing leadership at home before America can lead abroad. Where do you see this challenge for Joe Biden right now?
Well, I think now that Mr. Biden is president, I think the craziness in America will subside. And I think the whole world's interests, and certainly Australia's interests, are served when America is well governed and cohesive and appealing to the world and therefore strong. And for 4 years, America has been divided and unappealing to the world and weak. And so we can talk about individual policies on climate change and alliances and all those sorts of things, but it starts with the character of the person who was inaugurated as president today. A good person has been inaugurated as president. Not a perfect person, but a good person. And we haven't been able to say that for 4 years, and I think a lot of things will flow from that fact.
I noticed that Rahm Emanuel, the White House Chief of Staff to Barack Obama, said Lincoln had the Civil War, Wilson had the Spanish flu, Roosevelt had the Great Depression, Kennedy had the Cold War, Johnson had civil and racial unrest, Biden, all of the above.
Yeah, it's be careful what you wish for, I guess, is what some people would be thinking in relation to Mr. Biden. But I think the times will suit Biden. I have watched Biden change and grow as a person. I was on the National Mall 12 years ago when he was inaugurated as vice president, and he was still a sort of cocky former senator, thought he knew everything. The kind of Biden you see now is a very different person, actually. Obviously older, wiser, more willing to listen, more open to the way America is changing. But one constant, I think, is his instinct to reach across the aisle. I mean, that has been his signature move for 50 years. And God, do the Americans need it now when there is so much division in their country. So it may well be he has all these challenges, but maybe the times will suit him, Ellen.
Interestingly, I was quoting Fintan O'Toole, a really interesting article for The Guardian. He said, Joe Biden is a horse whisperer, but how are you a horse whisperer if, if you're dealing with congressional, wild dogs? So, I mean, are those political skills of compromise and all the rest of it really useful? I think a more interesting question is the one on China, though, Stan.
Yeah, look, there's sort of a double-barrel question, I suppose, Michael, in a sense, is that while COVID's the immediate threat, the long-lasting, big challenge is China, and that's going to define our century. We know that. What is the approach of Joe Biden? He's called Xi Jinping a thug. We know that the Democrats and Republicans have been of one voice when it comes to seeing a China challenge even a threat. What's the approach? Can he reset the relationship? And the second part of that is, where does this leave Australia? Because we're caught in the crosshairs of this.
Well, I think it's going to be a tougher approach to China than President Obama had, because China's behaviour has changed very significantly over the last 4 years. So I think it'll be tougher than Obama. I think it will be different from Trump. Trump was very one-dimensional. He was really focused on trade, on the trade deficit. Biden is going to look to compete with China. I wouldn't describe it as a reset with China. I think he's going to want to compete with China, but at the same time, he also needs to cooperate with China on big global issues like climate change. And as you said earlier, or as Christine Todd Whitman said, he has certainly identified that as a signature issue. So it will be trying to strike a balance for the Americans between competition and cooperation. For Australia, I think the early signs are good. Biden has appointed a number of friends of Australia, friends of the Lowy Institute actually, like Jake Sullivan, Eli Ratner, Kurt Campbell, to important Asia positions. But we have to accept that we are one of many relationships. Allies are an important part of this, but they're not the only part. And so we're going to have to be quite sharp-elbowed, very competitive in Washington, making sure that our interests are taken into account and our interests are accommodated.
Michael, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much again for giving us your time today.
Thank you very much.
And a new political era has begun in America. President Joe Biden has called it a day of hope, history and hope, of renewal and resolve. Only time will tell if his administration can heal a nation that some say is more divided than ever. I'm Ellen Fanning.
Yeah, remarkable day. These moments are always historic. Those speeches are recorded for posterity. The challenges are to the battle of the better angels of the nature and the dark realities of the country. That's what Joe Biden has certainly sketched today. I'm Stan Grant. It's been a pleasure to be with you today and bring you this historic day. We're going to have more coverage of this, of course, throughout the day here on the ABC On News Channel. Bye for now.
From the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters, this land was made for you and